Welcome to the Holistic Wealth Podcast. I'm your host, Keisha Blair, wife, mother of 3, author of Holistic Wealth, and founder of the Institute on Holistic Wealth. The show will showcase various experts in the key pillars of holistic wealth. Each week, we deliver the best information on how to become holistically wealthy and live your best life. Today, we have a very special guest. I have Jessica Moorhouse with me today. And Jessica, she's the host of the More Money podcast. Jessica, welcome to the show. It's so great to have you here.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm so excited to be on your show for a change.
Yes, great. And yes, I was on your show and it was amazing and got so much positive feedback from that. And Jessica, so we follow each other on social media. And what I've been particularly struck by is, and this is something you've said several times, is how you started this journey on personal finance and how you didn't start with a ton of experience or even a ton of knowledge. And here you are conquering the space. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I feel like I should be a good example for you don't need to start out with a bunch of experience. You can gain that experience over time. So, when I first started out, and I think this is also a big reason why people can connect with me because I'm relatable in that. It's not like I went to finance school or anything like that. I went to film school. Like I have a very bizarre background to go, kind of a weird journey to get to where I am. So when I graduated in 2009 during the recession, so that was a good time. And then I, quite honestly, just trying to figure out how can I pay off my student loan? I'm not really earning that much money. I was working some odd jobs, some contract jobs. And my older sister, who's 3 years older, she actually started reading some personal finance blogs and suggested a few. And I'm like, oh, that's pretty cool. I didn't know those things existed. And so I started reading these blogs and I'm like, you know what? This would be actually a really cool idea if I started my own. Why not? Anyone could start a blog and, it takes 2 minutes. You don't need to be tech savvy or anything like that to do that. And so, so it was, I think the end of 2011, I started my first personal finance blog. It was really just documenting my own personal finance journey, having a reason to learn about the stuff that I really didn't know, because I really did not know a heck of a lot. I had some good money management skills that I think I just gleaned from my mom, who's very frugal. She was kind of the money manager in her household. So I was pretty good at, living below my means, being savvy when it came to like prices and stuff, not, spending money I didn't have, all that kind of stuff. But beyond that, I didn't really know a heck of a lot. Like I didn't know really what the difference between a checking and savings account was because I had only had a savings account. And so there was a lot of things that I needed to level up. And so having the blog gave me a great opportunity to do that, to research this stuff and then also share it with other people.
That's amazing. And it's an amazing story. And, as somebody who's also kind of in the space, that resonates with me deeply because I didn't set out on this path either. And here we are now. And it's just an amazing journey so far. So Jessica, in terms of growing the blog into a 6-figure business, what steps did you take to do that? And how did you do it?
I'd say like the biggest thing that I feel like, especially when I compare myself to maybe other bloggers where we kind of maybe started our blogs around the same time, or, there's honestly, when it comes to like blogs specifically, like I do not have the biggest blog, but I know I actually have, I make more money than most bloggers. And part of the reason is because I didn't just stick with the blog. I could have very well just like put all my energy into growing that as the one kind of thing that I wanted to pursue. But no, I'm like, no, let's add on a podcast. And then let's add on YouTube and let's, kind of set myself up as this go-to millennial money expert because no one was really using that kind of brand technique where you kind of put yourself in a space where journalists want to find you. I mean, I just SEO optimized my website and my, podcast, my social channels. So if some journalist was looking for a millennial who also knew about money, they would find me because I did know what I was talking about, but you have to be where people are looking, right? And so that helped a lot in terms of getting some exposure and credibility. It still does. I've never honestly pitched a media outlet and I've been mentioned or featured by the media almost thousands of times. Maybe not 1,000, definitely 100, definitely close to 1,000 by now over the past several years. And that's really by kind of creating the job that you want instead of waiting for someone to hand it to you. I think for a long time, I was always waiting for opportunities just to drop in my lap. And when they didn't, you're like, okay, well, I guess I should do something different. And, for example, example, I'd see all these people I know and they'd get all these great, speaking opportunities on panels or keynotes or lunch and learns. I'm like, oh man, I would love to do that. And, no one ever reached out to me.
Right.
So I had the idea, and this was when I'm still working full time in 2016. I'm like, you know what? I need to prove that I can speak and then I do know what I'm talking about. So I'm going to start my own event series. And so that's when in September 2016, I started my own event series called the Millennial Money Meetup, which now is trademarked. I've done, I think, about 7 or 8 events now over the past several years. Obviously, COVID has kind of shut that down for the time being, but I can't wait to restart it. And that was actually great because not only did I show that, yes, I do know how to speak, I also know how to organize an event apparently, but I also kind of proved to myself, oh, wow, I actually do have some reach because I, was able to find a sponsor to pay for it. And I also sold out the event. There was 100 seats. I sold out in a matter of weeks. I'm like, oh, wow, I actually do have some kind of, I guess, influence over people. People do want to come to this event. And so again, that was like a huge risk. It could have been a huge flop. No one showed up, couldn't get money to pay for it, but it turned out okay. And that was like me taking kind of that first big leap of faith that, I think your blog can be more than just a blog. Maybe this can be a real business. And so doing lots of different things outside of my comfort zone that also other people in the space weren't doing. That's always just like, well, this is an opportunity. If no one's doing it, I mean, sometimes I think people are like, well, if no one's doing it, maybe there's a reason. I'm like, or maybe there's not. So maybe you should, enter that kind of empty space and own it.
Absolutely. And that's so interesting, Jessica, that you went out there, reached out, established your own event series and got like a sponsor to come on and of course sold it out. So I'm just wondering, because that would be one kind of line, one of your business lines. What are some of the other business lines? And is it possible to like give us an idea of which ones are kind of the most important in terms of building blocks of your income stream?
Yeah, well, it's definitely changed over the past 5 years. So 5 years ago is really when I started to make some real money. So in 2016, I was, contemplating leaving my job. I wasn't sure whether I would either go to a different company for a new role. Like the last resort really was quitting and trying to do this full time. I thought that was the craziest thing. There's no way I would do that. Like no one in my family is self-employed. No one in my inner circle rents their own business. So I'm like, well, that seems very crazy. Like everyone I know is an employee. So to do something outside of that seems a bit crazy. But that year, while I was working full time and, running the blog and the podcast, I was realizing, some brands are like being interested in me. They want to partner, whether it's like a podcast sponsorship or a sponsored blog post on my website or something like that. I'm like, oh, you can make money. Because honestly, up until that point, I was working for free for years, just putting out free content. And so I'm like, well, this is an interesting thing. That's, I feel like kind of the start of like influencership. And so I'm like, well, this is neat. And so for that first year in 2016, I made about $30,000, which was for me, and honestly, because I'm super frugal, I saved almost all of that. And so for me, that was kind of my, I'm going to leave fund, or, some people call it an F off fund. Right. And so it's outside of my, normal emergency fund. It was kind of that cash I was hoarding in case I need to make an escape from my job. And so when I was at that point where it's like, what do we want to do? We're going to quit for sure. But which path? I'm like, well, I have enough to pay all my bills and to continue my business because it was very low overhead for an entire year. So if we get to, a year and we're not making any money, which sounds unrealistic if you were able to make money while working full time, then you can find a job. It's like not the end of the world if it doesn't work out, but you're going to regret not trying, right? You're always going to be like, what if? And so that's what I did. I quit. I had, that good cushion to save me in case something happened. And then I tried to, take a good look at my business and see what are we doing and how are we making money? And so at the time it was predominantly the blog and the podcast, partnering with brands for like, sponsorships and stuff like that. And then that first year in 2017, I think I started to do some public speaking, but none of it was paid. I was just trying to get that, experience under my belt, and then slowly started adding some other kind of aspects to my business. So I have it all written down on my little chalkboard because honestly, I do so many different things. I kind of forget sometimes what I do. So, like I mentioned, I do events. And so that first one I did in September 2016, I didn't make any money. So everything I got from that sponsor, I put everything into the actual event so it could be a success. And so I probably actually lost a little bit of money, but, or broke even. But then I realized, okay, we did it that way. How can we replicate this event event because we know people will come, they'll buy some tickets. That first event was free. So I'm like, I think I can charge some money for tickets. And how can I also, have a little bit of money left over for me, because it does take a lot of time and energy to put on an event. So then I started doing events and making a little bit of money that way. I started doing a little bit of YouTube, just testing it out. And when you it's a long game, which is really exciting. So you could put out a video and no one really pays attention to it until a few years later. And then you're getting ad revenue, and that's completely passive because your video is already made. You don't have to do anything else. I also started training in 2017 to become a financial counselor. So an accredited financial counselor in Canada, because again, I wanted to get some formal credentials, because as women, I think in this industry, unlike men, we are questioned a lot about, well, what are your credentials? Why should I listen to you? I've heard it all. So I'm like, fine, let's get some stuff under my belt so I can kind of be like, well, this is why you should listen to me, even though, I know what I'm talking about. People like to see that. And so that's what I did. I spent 2017 getting those credentials. And then I started working with clients one-on-one as a financial counselor. And then since then too, now I get paid for speaking events. I also have some products that I personally sell. So I have budget spreadsheets that you can buy on my website. That's completely passive. It took a long time and energy and work to create all the spreadsheets, the video tutorials to go with them, the setup on my website. But now it's completely passive. It's all done. So if someone wants to buy it, they buy it and they're off to the races. I don't really have to do any extra work. It's all automated. And I have an online course. I'm going to be launching a few more. And so I actually originally launched a few courses in previous years. So I think it was in 2018 that I launched my first investing course. And then in 2020, right before the pandemic happened, I launched a more financial planning kind of in general course, but shut both of those down because I wanted to kind of reimagine them. And so I relaunched my investing course just this past February. And so I'm going to relaunch my financial planning one as well later in the year. And so again, that is a stream. I wouldn't really call it passive just because it is actually still a lot of work. And my kind of process for getting students in isn't passive. People can't just click a button and buy and enter the course. It's a specific course. I really wanted to make sure people weren't just signing up and not doing it. I want people to do the work so they can get the results. And so it's actually an application process. Not everyone gets in who applies. And then there's a lot of work on my part where I do biweekly, live calls with my students and all this kind of stuff, but it's still not as much work once all the kind of content is there. It's not as much work as say doing a live training every week or something like that. So those are kind of predominantly the ways that my kind of business runs. It's still a lot of, brand sponsorships and stuff like that, but also that's kind of growing too. Since I first started 5 years ago, a lot of it is more kind of spokesperson or kind of bigger campaigns, which is really exciting. But yeah, there's lots of different things that you can do. And for me, what's been interesting too, and especially again, when I compare myself to others that maybe we started at the same time, just started with a blog, I think the reason that I'm in the position I'm in is because I've done different things and I really wanted to make sure I diversified everything I could do. And that's been really helpful, especially during the pandemic when, I thought, 2020 was going to be the year I started doing a lot more public speaking. It was looking like that. And obviously that all got shut down. And so I was lucky in that I could do so many different things that I can pivot very easily. And so for me, all that public speaking got shelved until organizations can figure out how to do that digitally. And so I'm just kind of doubled down on financial counseling. If I only did public speaking, I'd probably have a harder time during 2020 because that was all I could do.
Absolutely. And that's so true. And that's why, diversifying those different sources of income is so important as this pandemic has taught us. And so, Jessica, just wondering as you're speaking, I have so many questions. I just wanted to know, because you mentioned the sponsorships and I'm sure people listening in are wondering, I wonder if I need a big email list for that. And I wonder, what I would put forth to a sponsor as something of value to get them on board. And so I'm just wondering, did you work hard at building your email list to then say present to a sponsor in terms of its size and attractiveness? Just wondering what you did in terms of attracting sponsors and what tools or what assets you had at your disposal.
Yeah. Well, yeah. An email list is one of the best things that I ever did to focus on. And this was like years and years ago, maybe 5 years ago before I went full time, but I started listening to, while I was still working full time in marketing, it was actually helpful. I would listen to marketing podcasts all the time, but I, had to cover, this is for my job. It really is also for my side hustle. And so I learned a lot just by listening to, popular marketing and advertising podcasts to be like, what should I do? What should I do? Also took some online courses on marketing just to really learn what you don't know. I think a lot of people feel like that is a big roadblock. They're like, I don't know how to do that. You know how easy it is to learn almost anything from the internet, either for free or, investing and, getting a course or getting a coach or something like that. I've never personally worked with a coach, but I know other people who have, and they found it very helpful. And so really kind of making that a priority to learn what you don't know was super, super helpful. So while I was listening to all of these amazing marketing podcasts, I actually had a friend who started out as a personal finance blogger, and then she kind of pivoted more into the digital marketing space and actually worked for a startup. And so she was really into all this stuff and even created her own personal brand about digital marketing, which was really, really cool. And she was like, the thing that everyone needs to focus on and no one really is. And this was honestly, back in maybe 2016 was email lists. And I think even during that time, because social media was kind of gaining a lot of traction, people thought email was dead. I remember seeing so many articles about email is dead, just ignore it. Absolutely not. It is 100% the biggest reason that I actually, enticed people to hire me as a financial counselor or buy my courses is because of my email list. Because if you think about it, it's like your direct access to your audience. You were speaking to them basically one-on-one. I mean, that is literally how I type out all of my emails. Like I've got a biweekly newsletter and then I've got, some different, automatic funnels and stuff going on. I'm writing these emails as if I am talking to that one person who I believe is my audience member. So it's very personal. And so you can have a really big impact on that person. So that should be your number one kind of thing. And again, too, once you kind of set up some of those ways to get people on your email list, for example, I have a number of freebies I've created years ago. I update them every once in a while to make sure they're still relevant. There's new information in them. I have some free budget spreadsheets. I've got some free, worksheets and cheat sheets and all these kind of things to help you. Then that's how I get people on my email list. And that's now because they've existed for so long, people can find them through different avenues, my podcast, YouTube channel, blog, or whatever. I have people signing up to my email list, basically, again, passively. I don't have to do anything new every single day. And those are new people to be on my list. I can eventually tell them, hey, you may be interested in my online course. If I do an event, hey, you want to come to my event or something like that. So that I feel like for anyone is the number one thing that everyone should do is really focus on that. Then outside of that, of course, your social media platforms are important. I mean, I am by no means the biggest kind of influencer on certain platforms, even though I've been on there for a while. Twitter, I've been on for probably the longest, which is why I have the biggest audience. But I use, Twitter, I use LinkedIn because I actually have quite a few connections on LinkedIn. Professionals want to learn about that. I use Facebook a little bit. It's not as I feel like Facebook, like having a Facebook page isn't as popular as it once was. And then of course I have Instagram, but trying to work on that and kind of hone that. But having those numbers and that audience, you do need to have proof if you want to work with a sponsor. Yeah, I do have an audience. Here are the numbers because they're going to ask you. And they're also going to ask for your blog traffic. If you have a podcast, they're going to ask about your downloads. If you have a YouTube channel, subscribers, you do need that kind of social proof and those numbers to kind of back you up. But that shouldn't deter you from trying. Because again, I have a bigger audience now than I did, 4 or 5 years ago, but I was able to get sponsorship. So I think part of it was also I'm part of it. This is a niche. Personal finance is a niche. It's not like I'm a fashion or lifestyle influencer where there's so much competition. There's not a lot of competition in personal finance. That doesn't mean that I'm complacent and knowing, there's not many options, so they're going to have to hire me. For me, that gives me kind of that motivation to continue to grow my audience and expand my brand. Because I'm like, okay, there's, this is a very kind of small category, but that also, again, is an opportunity for me to maybe be the top person in that category because there's not that much competition.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And so Jessica, like I've seen you do, and I don't know what these are called technically, but I've seen you do partnerships with some of the big banks and financial institutions like PC Financial, or just to name a few. And let's say with bigger companies and bigger organizations, in your experience, is it that they require more in terms of validating the size of your email list or your social media? What does it take then to work with, if people are listening and they want to work with big brands and some of the big name companies, what does it take in your experience to then work with them? Did you proactively reach out? Did they reach out to you and kind of?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah. So funnily enough, I rarely reach out to them. Sometimes for the podcast, if like, for this, I actually, it's on my to-do list. I'm like, oh, I need to get a sponsor for my podcast, coming up. But in general, they come to me. And I think part of that is a couple reasons. I have been around in this space for a while. So I do have that kind of name recognition. I've also worked with these companies or agencies that represent these companies for, maybe 5-6 years now. And so they recognize me, they trust me, they know I'll do good work. We have good relationships. So, and that's the other key thing too, because I know other people, in the space, either in Canada or the US, who have a bigger audience, but they've burned a lot of bridges because maybe they weren't professional. They didn't deliver what they were supposed to. They were late, all these kinds of things. So you need to remember every single time you do a project, no matter how big or small it is, you have to be professional. You have to deliver. You have to pretend like this is the most important thing. So they come back to you. So pretty much I've worked with almost every personal finance or financial kind of brand that I've wanted to in Canada and even the US, which has been great. And part of that is because it's the repeat clients, or I'll work with an individual at an agency. They'll really like me. They'll maybe move to another agency, work with a different client, and they'll want to hire me because they had a good experience. So relationships is super, super important. But in terms of how to actually attract those people in the first place, there's a couple different things. For example, I'd say like the first kind of time that I actually felt like, oh, okay, maybe brands will want to work with me was when I did that event. That was the first time that I really reached out to a brand and say, hey, can I get a good size of money for this event? And they're like, well, why should we give you this money? And then I pitched them being like, no one else is doing anything like this. This is where you can really get your brand in front of millennials who, and it was an online bank. And so I'm like, this is, a great partnership because millennials want to save money on bank fees. They want to earn higher interest. They're more likely to actually sign up with an online bank. So, I pitched them something that I'm like, this is so unique. It would be crazy if you passed it up. And they liked it and it was a success. So creating something unique that no one else is offering is, one way to kind of entice them to work with you. Cause I think a lot of, people in the space, again, are just doing their thing and they're doing it well, but they may not be thinking outside the box and trying something different. Again, to this day, I don't know anyone else. There are actually a few people that have started events after I started events, which is maybe they saw what I was doing. They said, oh, that's a good idea. I'm going to start that too. But still, it's not like everyone's doing it. So again, that's even an opportunity, and I mainly do my events in Toronto. So if you live somewhere else, hello, what a great opportunity to start one in your town. And again, you can be like, this is, a great idea for Calgary. Again, this is in post-pandemic times with the event, example, but really setting yourself up so you look different and unique is the key thing across the board. And of course, numbers are important. So really focusing on how you can grow all of that. But I feel like if you're focusing on being unique and delivering something that's different, but also valuable to your audience, those numbers will kind of follow naturally.
So many people have lost their jobs, during COVID-19, and they're wondering, what can I start? What kind of side hustle, what can I do to earn some income for myself? And I think we've been seeing it so much, and I've been talking about it too, is that we also need to be financially resilient, and those passive income streams or even active income streams help us to do that because, we're able to bounce back from, setbacks financially. And so that's awesome. And so Jessica, I had asked, and I've been asking many guests to share their personal financial identities from that quiz that I created, because it's such a big part of the podcast. And, for the audience, learning and listening into these insights is so invaluable because several entrepreneurs so far have been even sharing how, their personal financial identities have influenced their business decisions, their money philosophy, their spending philosophy, the ways they take risks in their businesses and in their personal lives, and even in their relationships at home with their spouses. It's a topic that I've been talking about a lot. It came up in my book, Holistic Wealth, and several readers came forward asking me, so how do I figure out mine? And so that's when I got to, starting the work of developing the framework and the quiz to help readers. And so it'd be great to hear what yours is, and, you know, any other valuable insights that you have on that would be great.
Yeah. So took your quiz, and unsurprisingly, I think from lots of the answers of this podcast, I'm a risk taker. What I will say though, because even when I see that, I'm like almost still a bit surprised. I think what lots of people don't think about, whether this is in their life or just like their personal financial identity, or their just, you know, general personal identity. These are things that can change. I used to think that, you know, you are who you are, you can't change who you are. You're on a certain path. So for instance, you know, for most of my 20s and even growing up, I was actually pretty shy, you know, kind of an anxious, you know, would worry about everything, was terrified of change, doing something new, taking a risk. I was very play it safe, conservative, just because I don't know, like, you know, things have happened, I guess, maybe in my childhood and in the past where it's like, oh, I tried that and it didn't work out, or I tried that and I got hurt or something like that. And so I'm like, oh, I don't want to do that. I'd like to play it safe. That sounds good to me. And then at a certain point, I'm like, I'm getting so like it wasn't fun. My experience with my first time taking a huge risk was, you know, I'd been at this one job, and you know, I'm originally from Vancouver. I was there for 3 years. It was a decent job, but didn't pay well, but it was still all right for my first job out of university. And I was just like kind of looking around, and I'm like, what am I still doing here? This has nothing to do with kind of the career I have in mind. And it was at a newspaper, and you know, not a very, you know, exciting growing industry. You know, there was always layoffs or the potential for layoffs. It was actually very scary. I'm like, I need to, you know, this is not what I thought my life would be. Like, I'm actually, even though I was, you know, fairly conservative and like afraid to take risks, I'm still I've always been ambitious, always very ambitious. So there was always kind of like that friction there of like, how can you be ambitious, but also terrified to, you know, actually do the things you need to do to actually achieve what you have in your mind. And so the biggest thing, you know, is really just take one leap of faith, some risk, obviously calculated. Again, everything I've done, especially on the personal finance side, has been very like, let's make sure we've got money in the bank so we don't go bankrupt or something like that. We want to make sure we're doing this strategically and smart. But it was when me and my husband, we were honestly just a few months away from getting married. And I'm like, do you think maybe we should move? And we'd also prior gone to Thailand for like our kind of longest trip we've still ever been, which was about a month, and, you know, traveled around, had a lot of time to self-reflect and be like, what do we want to do? And, you know, at this time, I think I was 25 or 26. And so we're, you know, still in our mid 20s. And yeah, we made the decision, let's do it. Let's go to Toronto and see what happens. It seemed like there was a lot more happening there. So let's, you know, and worst comes to worst, we'll move back, and it's not that big of a deal. And so, but there's still a big thing, right? Moving across the country. We didn't know anyone there. We have no family here. We had to make friends from scratch. It was very scary. We didn't have any jobs. And so that was the biggest leap of faith. And it was really difficult first year trying to acclimatize and, you know, meet new people and find work and all that stuff. But now we've been here almost 8 years, and it was literally, we still look at each other and we're like, this was the best thing we've ever done. That if we hadn't done this, we would not be where we are in our careers, in our lives. Like it was the best thing, but it was also the scariest thing that we could have ever done. And so because we did that, taking other risks was easier. So sometimes you just need to start with one thing. And then the next thing, you know, it is kind of like a baby step. Sometimes you have to take one big leap and then a couple other steps, and it doesn't seem that scary. So everything, all the risks that I take, it's easier. It doesn't feel as traumatic as that first one, because I can look back and see all the other kind of choices and risks that I've taken. And again, not all of them have worked out. I've definitely had some failures, but I think the other important thing too is whenever you fail, quote unquote, I don't really like to look at it as a failure. It's always a learning lesson. Sometimes you had to go through that to learn something really important that you'll then take into the next risk you take or the next decision you make that will actually help you in the future. So everything that hasn't worked out, I'm like, that did not work out for a very good reason. And I'm actually glad it didn't work out. So it's, yeah, my kind of tip, I guess, is even if you feel like you're not a risk taker, you can become one. It's all just about taking, you know, your time and making choices. And then the more risks you take, the easier it gets to continue to take on more risk.
Absolutely. And that's so important. And it's so funny because I have a whole chapter in Holistic Wealth on taking measured risks. And I'm a risk taker like you too. So I had to include like one entire chapter on that to, you know, to drive home the point to everyone about the importance of taking risks. And so, Jessica, I want to go back to a very important point you made at the beginning of this discussion on the whole personal financial identities thing, because you mentioned something so important and so insightful that I don't think anyone else has shared so far. And, it's that you mentioned that you can change, things can change. You don't have to be one thing or the other over your lifetime. Because you mentioned that, and it sounded to me, I don't know, maybe you were, one of the other identities is the anxious spender / investor. It sounded to me like maybe at one point you may have been a bit more anxious than you were now about money, and maybe, your childhood or something else, other external events kind of influence that. And I wanted just to go back there. It's just to ask you, because that's very insightful. I'm wondering if you can, shed some more light on that point that you made, just to give readers a sense of kind of how that evolved for you in terms of blooming and blossoming into a risk taker from potentially another outlook or another tendency that you may have had in the past.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely like looking at the different personal financial identities. The anxious spender investor was me. I was so anxious about doing anything with my money. I kind of called myself a money hoarder. I would just hoard money in savings because I was terrified of losing anything, because quite honestly, I didn't grow up well off at all. And then when I, moved out on my own, I really didn't have that much money. And then I didn't earn that much money for a number of years. So I was very, of that scarcity mindset, terrified of just losing my job, losing my money, and being, having to move back to my parents' basement as, 30-year-old, that was terrifying to me. And so again, that really kind of played into why for a long time I didn't do any, anything crazy. I didn't take any risks when maybe I should have earlier. But then there really was that point where, and I think these things come up all the time in our minds, like where we have that moment of kind of, whoa, what am I doing? Like you just, we're on autopilot all the time, but sometimes you have a moment where you have a good kind of, I don't know, some clarity maybe, where you ask yourself, what am I doing and why? And does this make me happy? I know a lot of people have experienced that during the pandemic, where you have to kind of reassess your life, your journey. And so I had a lot of that, especially as I'd been at that job for 3 years, and I'm like, I'm not happy here. I want to leave. But then I'm like, but what do I want to do after? Like, what's kind of in the future and the horizon for me? And so I realized, even though, part of me is this anxious spender investor, hardly invested any money and, just hoarded my money and was just anxious about money all the time. I didn't want to be like that. Like, I'm like, I am this, but I don't want to be, I see other people and I'm like, I want to be that. I want to be the risk taker, because that seems like so crazy to me. I have done lots of little kind of testings of taking risks throughout, in high school and university and stuff like that. Like, for instance, I think I mentioned, I did a film degree in university, which is so bizarre. Some people think, because I'm in personal finance now, but that was a big risk. I had been so passionate about film. And they said it's actually in this particular program, I think it's changed a lot since I was in it. I mean, back in 2004 or 2005, but it was very difficult to get in. They only allowed 30 students in per year for this particular program. And then they kicked out a bunch of kids, like I think 2 to 4 people after 2 years. So you could do 2 years of this degree and be kicked out if your grades weren't high enough or your projects or your films weren't good enough. So that was pretty intimidating. And so normal me would have been like, oh, there's no way. Like when I kind of calculate the risk and the reward, I don't know if I want to do it. But then I'm like, you know what? Let's just do it. And then it worked out. I got in. I mean, I was put on the wait list, but then I eventually got in. So I think it's important to kind of test out those different personalities to also see what makes me excited and good. So even though I was in general this kind of anxious, like, oh, I don't want to, rock the boat, whenever I tried to kind of test out that risk taker personality and something good happened, I'm like, this feels like me. This feels like the me I actually want to be, but I'm sometimes too afraid to actually, personify. So going back to, you can be in one state or one identity. That doesn't mean that you're stuck. You can change, and some of that's life experience. So it'll happen kind of naturally. And some of it will be, active on your part. You'll have to actively make some different decisions and choices.
And so, Jessica, before we wrap up, just because you mentioned, doing the financial counseling, and we're in the midst of a pandemic where money is now the number one concern of people everywhere, even over and above COVID-19. I think Wallet Hub just, released this survey. It was done in America, but I'm sure for Canadians, it's the same thing. What concerns have they been bringing up? And kind of, can you share kind of like your 2 top pieces of advice for people navigating money concerns and money decisions during this time?
Yeah, I definitely feel like I've talked to so many people over the past year, and it's been interesting. There's kind of two camps of people. There's the people who, have been affected by the pandemic, but not in, a really terrible way. So they now work from home. They're maybe saving a bit more money because they don't have to commute. It's not that bad compared to other people who are really having a rough time, but it's given them this time to reflect on, oh my gosh, I haven't really, I've been pretty lucky, and I'm still lucky to have work during this really trying year. I should really try to get my ducks in a row, or I've never really thought about the next step for me. So maybe they were always good at paying their bills and saving a little bit of money, but not making any real progress with their money. And so now they're looking into, how do I actually build my wealth, or how do I create some passive streams of income in case something happens, or, maybe my emergency fund, maybe I don't have one, or maybe I need to get, start building it up, or all these kind of things. So there's people in that camp that are like, oh, I need to take this opportunity to really assess where I'm at and make sure, I'm a bit better off and I can actually make some progress because I've had my head in the sand, haven't really thought about personal finance ever. And then there's the other people who've had the worst time during this time, which it sucks because it has nothing to do with them particularly. They were just working in an industry that has, collapsed because of the situation, or, they just have a really rough time. And so for those people, it's, kind of similarly, it's really about assessing where you're at. What are some things that you can do to kind of help yourself? And sometimes it is making hard decisions. I've had lots of conversations with people being like, does it make sense for me to move back in with my parents? And, sometimes the answer is yes. If you feel like you can't afford to live on your own, you can't pay your bills, your hours have been cut, or you lost your job, and you're just trying to stay afloat, you need to do whatever you can to help yourself, because this is a temporary situation. It won't always be like this, but you do need to be like, how do I protect myself and my financial future and my future in general right now? Do whatever you need to do. And for instance, talking about, people losing their jobs, or, their hours have been cut. I know so many people that have felt conflicted about, should I try to get a job in some other industry, or should I try to get some sort of side hustle, either making my own business on the side, or, doing Uber Eats or something like that. And I'm like, do whatever you need to do to protect yourself, to make some money so you don't get into further debt, so you can pay your bills. It's really not about having an ego right now. I think it's really about letting that go and doing what you need to do to set yourself up so you're going to be okay after this. I mean, I think lots of people don't know this about me because, things are doing well right now. But I'm like, I hustled my butt off throughout my 20s, like literally up until, I'm still hustling, let's be honest. But like when I was in my 20s, I finally moved out of my parents' house. I finally got a full-time job. I really wasn't earning that much. And I was living in Vancouver, very expensive. I kept up. Not only did I have that blog that I was doing on the side, but I also had a second job. I was a teleprompter operator for the news that I stuck around for like 3.5 years there. And I needed to, so, I was a little bit embarrassed because I didn't know anybody else in my, friend group or even at work. No one had a second job. No one talked about side hustles. But that's when I was starting to like read other personal finance, blogs, and they were a little bit more open about that. And if I hadn't had that second job, there was no way I could have taken some of the risks that I kind of talked about. I wouldn't have been able to move to Toronto because I wouldn't have had any savings. I wouldn't have felt financially secure enough to leave my, paying job to move to Toronto where I had 0 jobs. So, you need to do what you can that's best for you. Stop, just kind of get rid of the noise. Don't pay attention to what other people are doing because we have no idea what's going on in their lives. You need to pay attention to you. And that's not selfish. I like to think that's more of a self-care kind of attribute.
Yeah, absolutely. And such words of wisdom. And thank you so much for sharing, these strategies and tips with us, Jessica. It was amazing having you here. Can you tell the audience where to find you, your website and social media?
Absolutely. So you can find me at jessicamoorhouse.com. I also have a podcast specifically on, personal finance topics, whatever you could think of. I've probably done an episode on it called the More Money Podcast. And you can find me on Instagram at Jessica I Moorhouse and on Twitter at JESSI_Moorhouse. So that's MOORHOUSE.
Perfect. And once again, thanks so much, Jessica. It was great having you here.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us this week on Holistic Wealth with Keisha Blair. Make sure to visit our website, KeishaBlair.com, where you can subscribe to the show on iTunes, Spotify, or via RSS, so you will never miss a show. While you're at it, if you found value in this show, we'd appreciate a rating on iTunes, or if you simply tell a friend about the show, that would help us out too. Are you a member of the Institute on Holistic Wealth? If not, what are you waiting for? Go to Institute on Holistic Wealth /memberships to choose your membership plan and join. As a member, you get so many perks. Free worksheets, advice, coaching, and a member's workshop to design an intentionally designed life. You need to figure out your life purpose? Take the Build Your Life Purpose Portfolio online self-paced course. You're struggling with all your money decisions? Take the free financial identities quiz and then take the course. You recently had a breakup, job loss, or experienced the death of a loved one? Take the Holistic Healing course. You need an overall plan to achieve holistic wealth? We will help you figure out your holistic wealth blueprint. And of course, if you want to start making money by helping others achieve holistic wealth, become a certified holistic wealth consultant. Regardless of what career you've got, the Institute will show you how to increase your income and walk in your purpose. The sooner you join, the sooner you start to achieve a more holistically wealthy lifestyle. And you're going to want to stay for a very long time. So go to Institute on Holistic Wealth /memberships to join. If you haven't read the book yet, pick up a copy of the award-winning, best-selling Holistic Wealth 32 Life Lessons to help you find purpose, prosperity, and happiness.